Okay, everybody, meeting is being recorded. So thank you very much for joining us here in the Michael's Community Classroom. We are super excited to be back like we are every Monday night. My name is John, and I will be answering questions for you guys in the chat and also passing them along to Kirsten. Yep. And for those of you who have joined us before, you probably know Kirsten. She's one of our regular teachers here in the classroom. And she is doing a beautiful Impasto Peacock painting tonight, which I guess you know since you signed up for it. So you're probably pretty excited to get started. So I'm not going to waste a bunch of time. Let's go ahead and hand it over to Kirsten.
Hey everyone, thanks for joining us. So tonight, like John said, we're painting this peacock. And first thing I want to do is show you guys the supplies that you are going to need for tonight. So I am working on a 10 by 10 canvas, just a stretched 10 by 10, not base coated yet. And then we are using FolkArt acrylic, which is my favorite acrylic paint to use. And let me go through the colors that we are using. We're going to be using navy blue, which will actually be our base coat. We're going to be using wicker white. We are going to be using crushed coral. We are going to be using this yellow ochre. Two different beautiful blues. We're going to be using ink spot and Cayman blue. And then we're going to be using this bright green, which is a beautiful green. And then a little bit of engine red. And one thing I tell everybody before we get started, use any color that you want. If you want to replace the red with maybe a bright pink, or you want to replace one of maybe these dark ink spots with a plum or a purple, use a palette that you like best, but I'm going to be teaching with these colors. So I want to make sure that everybody has a palette. I love to use palette paper. Always some water to clean your brushes and some paper towels. And then I'm using a brush set tonight that includes a 3/4 inch brush, a 1/2 inch flat brush, and then a number 10, a number 2, and a number 6 flat brush. So those are pretty specific, but rule tonight is really any flat brush would work, even if you would look at it as having a large, a medium, and a small. There's nothing that we're doing that has to be a specific number 2, a number 6, or a number 8. You could look at it as having a large, a medium, and a small. And I just prefer a flat brush. We are also using tonight, we are using the palette knife, which the palette knife, what I want people to know tonight is if you love the palette knife, we are going to learn some techniques that just makes your painting that much more detailed. But if you are not comfortable or you don't want to use the palette knife, your painting is going to be beautiful without the palette knife. So stay tuned, do what we're doing and use the palette knife if you're comfortable. But if not, you're going to have a beautiful painting without it. So one thing you guys also need is a pencil or a piece of chalk. I'm using chalk just because I want you guys to be able to see it better on the camera. But if you've got a pencil or even a pen laying around, you're going to need that to apply your pattern. And I always put a blow dryer on the supply list because the key to what I'm painting tonight is you want your base coat to be dark and dry. I don't want you guys to start anything on a dark or on a wet base coat. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is using our navy blue. You're going to squeeze that onto your palette. You can use a paper plate. You can use even a glass ceramic plate, but I love to use the palette paper. One thing that I'm probably going to say a million times tonight, so I'm apologizing, but I probably will, just to remind you, this technique, it's kind of a lot of dry brush, a lot of palette knife, a lot of blending and shading, but never with any water. So all of the brushes, I always want them to be as dry as possible. You can definitely wash them in the water, but you want to then dry them as good as you can on the paper towel. So using the navy blue and your largest flat brush, we are just going to base coat our canvas. The FolkArt acrylic, you can see it's so rich and creamy, a base coat of this dark navy over white. You can see we're only going to need one coat. You want your base coat to just be nice and even. It absolutely does not need to be perfect, but you just want a really dark color for all of the blending and shading and the techniques that we're doing tonight. Don't add any water while you're base coating, because that will just thin out your paint, thin out your color, make too much of that white show through, and also make the acrylic paint not dry as fast. So it doesn't have to be perfect, but make sure that you don't have any areas of really thick paint. And I always say these stretched canvases by Michaels are so perfect, even without a frame. That's why the edges are so pretty. You don't ever see any staples. So I always like to say, do to the side of your canvas what you're going to do to the top, because then when your painting is done, it's ready to frame, or it's ready to hang. You don't even need a frame. So always do to the edges what you're doing to the top. So I'm just also base coating with that navy color. Let me get a little bit more navy. Just enough. Oh.
So Kirsten, real quick, let's see, what size canvas did you use? Is this a 10 by 10 or?
Yep, we are working tonight on a 10 by 10.
Okay, and somebody was asking if you used any gesso or anything on the canvas first.
No, these canvases are so great. You do not have to prime or gesso them at all. I'm just base coating them with a navy blue because we want the dark color. If you were painting on a white or a light color, you could go right on the canvas.
Got it.
So now you guys keep base coating, and you can see it's such a good solid color. The FolkArt is so thick. And then what I want to make sure that you guys do is hit this with a blow dryer, because we want to work on a completely dry canvas. So while you guys base coat, I'm going to dry mine with the blow dryer. Okay, you can see it just dries so quick.
Always a good idea to have your hair dryer on these classes, because it seems like every week we're using one. So
Yeah, I think Jesse and I both. I think we just like to make sure that you guys are working on a dry base coat, so you can just really have a better chance of learning all of the really fun techniques that we're going to teach you guys.
So
Okay.
I just real quick before we start, Kirsten, I do see that there's several folks in here who are just watching, they say, which is great, because if you want to be able to work at your own pace, or if you want to be able to go back and rewind and look at different things, you know, these classes are recorded and they're available on Michael's website after the fact. So within 24 to 48 hours. So a lot of people do like to just kind of watch the first time and ask questions in the chat. And then they go back and paint later. So if you want to do that, that's great. Or even if you feel like you're beginning to fall behind, you can stop at any point and just go ahead and do that. So that's something that a lot of folks do. All right.
Okay, so you should have your base coat. Again, you can see a few areas where mine is not perfect. Do not apply a second coat. There's no need for that. Just make sure that it's mostly blue and that it is dry. So what I always like to say is, the style that I like to paint in is just, you can see, just very loose. And so I don't ever want anybody to be intimidated by a perfect pattern. So what I like to do is just kind of break everything down into basic shapes. So like the shape of the bird's neck, maybe the basic shape of the feathers, which is kind of like a leaf pattern. So what we're going to do, I always like to measure with my hand. So I'm going to measure about 3 fingers down from the top on the left side of my canvas, and I'm just going to make a little mark. And all that's really representing is the top of the little bird's head. And then I want you again to just view that little bird as just a really soft wave. And I want you to just apply almost a little backwards, what is that? A backwards S, just to represent his little head. And then round that to where his little face will be. And then under his little neck, where his neck is right there, I just want you to do another little curve. And also when we apply a pattern, that is a guide. That's not something that we are going to color around exactly. It's just to give you the confidence on where to place everything else. And then what I want you to do on this big right side is I want you to do usually odd numbers. It's always better to do odd numbers when you're doing a pattern like this, because even sometimes tends to look maybe too planned out. So I'm going to go with 7, and I am just going to do 7 lines. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then maybe 1 right there. Very random, not in order. You don't want it to look like tile or shingles. Very random. And again, those are just for placement. They don't have to be the same length. You just want to kind of place the center of your feathers. And then once you've done that, I am just going to almost make each one into a very loose, kind of like a really simple leaf. That one you can see runs right off the canvas. That's perfect. And again, we're not going to color that exactly. It's just a guide for where we're going to place our feathers. And you can see there's no rhyme or reason. He's a little bit bigger. He's falling off the canvas, but they're all going in the direction of the little guy's tail, but very loose and very random. Okay. And I think I said in the beginning, I'm using chalk so you guys can really see it on the screen. But if you've got a pencil, you would be able to see that at home. Make sure, the only key is make sure that you don't mash down really hard, because you don't want to dent or damage your canvas. You just want it to be something that you can see. Okay, so the first colors that we are going to use is we are going to use our yellow ochre. We're going to use wicker white, which I always like to have on my palette. We're going to use Cayman blue, or if you just have a really pretty turquoise, aqua, just a really pretty turquoise color, but we're using Cayman blue. And you are going to put each of those colors onto your palette. With this dry brush technique, you don't ever need a bunch of paint. So I usually put about a nickel size dollop of paint. And then we're going to have a little bit of this crushed coral, which is a color that I'm absolutely loving. And then a little bit of the red, and just a little. You can see in our feathers, the red and the coral, we're just using a little bit of. Okay, so I am going to start with my number 10 brush, no water, dry bristles. And if I said in the beginning, just a medium-sized flat brush. If you're more comfortable with maybe a number 8 or a number 6, perfect, but I'm just using a number 10, but just a basic flat brush. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do, not using any water, is we're going to go into that yellow ochre. We're going to get it on our brush, not too much, but we don't want to soak our brush because we want to always see the dark background through our first coat of paint. So on the end of each of your little feathers, you are just going to do a little circle. Starting, let me actually start there. I think you guys can see that one better. My hand won't cover it. Starting where your little leaf or feather is, you're just going to do almost like a little teardrop shape, and then fill that in. But you don't want solid coverage. I'm going to hold my brush at the very end, mainly so my hand doesn't cover it. But you're just going to start where your little pattern is, and you're going to do a little teardrop shape, and then you're going to fill it in. And you can see you definitely want the texture of the canvas and that navy blue to show through. You don't want to cover that up. That's one of the reasons why I love working on a dark canvas, is because the base coat coming through what we put on top is what gives you all of that great dimension. But on the end of each little feather, I'm just going to do a little teardrop and then fill that in, but not solid. We're not color book painting. We're just starting to layer the colors on our feathers. Okay. Then I'm going to clean that brush in the water. But this is where it's really important. Get that as dry as you can on the paper towel. And then I'm going to go into that Cayman blue or turquoise or aqua, whatever color you've got. Make sure you don't have any water. If you do, maybe run it on the paper towel one more time. And then going almost like a rainbow over my yellow, I'm going to do a little stripe above the yellow. And you can see I'm going over my pattern. I'm not overthinking and coloring it in like a coloring book. I'm just still using that chalk pattern or pencil pattern as a guide. But you're just almost creating like a little rainbow arch over that yellow. But you can see there's always the dark base coat showing through. Maybe if I hold that up. They look like little acorns with blue tops. But see how the navy coming through makes it look like we added some shadows to that blue when all we did is work on a dark base coat.
Sure. We need to give people a second to catch up.
Okay.
Let's do that.
Absolutely.
Let's see.
I'm going to clean my brush and we'll do the next color after a minute. Any other questions about anything else?
I don't think so. Not so far.
All righty. Always remember less is more, because you can always go and add some more of the yellow or the turquoise, but you can't take it off. So you definitely don't want to have a solid base coated area.
Oh, if someone doesn't have crushed coral, I guess, what would you use there?
And here you could use a pink instead. You could mix a little bit of orange and yellow together and just maybe get a little brighter coral. Any color, any shade of pink, even the red that we're using, the engine red, a little bit of white and a little bit of the yellow ochre could get a really nice coral.
Okay. All right.
How's
Let's
everyone?
go ahead. Let's go ahead and move on to the next. We'll just move on to the next color and see how folks are doing.
So all we're doing here is on a dry brush, same number 10. I picked up that crushed coral and I'm just going to do another little arch over that turquoise. You can see I'm getting a little bit smaller because the pattern comes to a little tip, but just a really loose arch over that turquoise color. Still letting the navy blue show through from our base coat. And like on this little feather, you can see this is where it jumped off the canvas. I'm just going to go as far as I need to because that feather is falling off the canvas. If the colors overlap a little, like right there, it overlapped, that is beautiful. The FolkArt doesn't muddy up at all. If there's a little blue of the navy blue showing through, that's even nice. But you're just wanting to get another stripe of color on your little bird's feathers. And then to go into the red is our last color. I am not even going to clean my brush in water. I'm just going to remove any of that extra crushed coral on a paper towel. And then I'm going to go right into the red. And then on that one, you'll see the end of our little pattern is more like a little diamond. So I'm just going to go in there and fill in that last little section of our pattern. But again, not being exact, just getting placement for our feathers. Because you'll see when we're done, we've added so much technique that we're going to lose a lot of these sharp edges, but we're just placing color for now. So you should have 4 colors all representing where your little feathers will sit. And then I'm going to clean my brush in the water and dry it on the paper towel. And then I'm going to get that bright green, which I absolutely love, and put that on my palette. I'm going to load that. I'm still using the number 10. Now, if you've got a smaller flat and you're more comfortable working with a smaller brush, definitely use maybe a number 8 or a number 6. I just like to use the number 10.
What color red was that you just used, Kirsten?
That was engine red.
Engine red, okay.
But again, any red, even like a burgundy, any red would work. And then what we are going to do is we are going to almost outline each little section of the feather. You can see on here how green kind of outlines the little sections of color. So to do that, you're going to start where the yellow is. And I'm just going to stay up on my chisel edge, which is the flat part of the end of the brush. Actually, I'm going to try to hold my brush kind of weird so my hand doesn't cover it. And then I'm just going to, I can't tell, can you guys see that? Get my hand out of the way. I'm just going to really loosely outline each little section of color or feather. Can you guys see that? I'm holding my brush really weird. There we go. And you can see there that feather is falling off. So just do the same thing, but just let it fall off the end of the canvas. You don't want to cover up that navy blue. You want that to come through all of the different colors that we're using tonight. Now, what I want to do here, I'm still loading the green. I'm going to dry off or remove some of that paint, not in the water, but just on the paper towel. And then I'm going to pick up a little bit of white on my brush. The green is still in there, but now the white is in there. And I'm just going to overstroke, not too much white. I'm going to overlap where I've already done the green. But what that does is it just kind of brightens up that green. Let me see if I can hold that up. And it just gives you another layer of color. So you've got the navy blue, then you've got the green, and then you've got the white, all dry brushed on top. So you get a highlight, you get a different shade of green by just using white and bright green. I'm going to do that over each little area.
And now which green is this that you're using, Kirsten?
For this one, we're using the bright green. FolkArt
bright green.
Yep.
Okay.
But this is another spot. If you've got a richer hunter green or a color that maybe works better with your decor, use any green that you like. And I'm just kind of, someone said in a class months ago, and I loved it, we're almost like dusting on color. Not too much, we're not saturating the canvas, but just going between green and picking up a little bit of white every now and then. We're just kind of dusting around those feathers to create all of that dimension.
Somebody was just asking about metallics for a painting like this. That could be pretty wild.
Absolutely beautiful.
Yeah.
You know, it'd be pretty. We have a really pretty dark blue metallic. You could base coat in the metallic. Oh, that would be beautiful. So what I'm going to do now, so you've kind of got, this is almost, view this as the base coat to your feathers. So I cleaned my brush, dried it on a paper towel, and I'm going to go just to brighten up all of these colors. The red is really the darkest. I'm going to go into that red again and just do a second layer, just dry brushed. Nothing different than what we did before. We're just adding another layer of the red right over the red. Very random, very loose, but just brightening up that red a little bit. Just like we did with the green, I'm going to get a touch of white and just do a little stroke here and there on the red. Oh, that was too much. But just to what the white does is it just gives whatever color you're putting the white over, it just gives that color just a little bit of blending and shading. I'm going to clean my brush and do the same thing with the coral. A second layer of coral, crushed coral. But still letting that navy show through. And then just a little touch of white, dry brushed over that. I love when the white allows the texture of the canvas to come through. I think that is such a nice look. I'm going to do the same with the aqua, just to brighten up the colors. Sometimes 2 coats dry brushed really makes those colors that much more vivid. Yeah, you can see the difference between 1 coat dry brushed and the second, but you still want that navy blue to show through. And just the littlest bit of white, just to make it look like a little highlight. And last, the yellow. Yellow and red are always the colors that always look the best after a second coat. But just in a few areas, adding just a touch of the yellow. See how much brighter that all got by doing the second coat. And then the same thing, the tiniest bit of white, just to add a little highlight. But always with a dry brush, never with any water, and never coloring it in completely.
We'll let folks catch up a little bit on that. So everybody just go back in your white and brighten up all your colors.
Like a second coat of dry brush, matching the color, the first color that you did, and then just the littlest bit of white, just to get a little highlight or a little accent.
All right.
Any other questions?
I don't think so.
No, I hope it's okay. So while
Maybe people are asking what the female peacock is called.
Are they?
I don't know if they're asking, but did you know that that peacocks are all males?
Oh, look. Oh, look. Everyone is so smart.
See, they all know.
Oh, hen.
Hen, that's right. Now, collectively, they are known as what? The hen and the peacock collectively are known as.
Don't tell. Let's see.
Fowl. Someone got it.
6 is a genius.
Mm-hmm. This is a discussion we had before the painting because Kirsten was thinking about naming her peacock, and we had to say that it had to be a boy because, otherwise it would be a peahen.
I hope I am not the only one on this that did not know that a group of peacocks was a peafowl, because I did not know that until tonight. Oh, look, someone else learned something.
See,
Cindy,
that's right. It's good to know.
I have never taken my children to the zoo and said, you guys, look at that little family of peafowl.
Let's go see the peafowl. Well, that's great.
I've never done that, but now I will.
Mm-hmm. If everyone wants to nominate a name for the peacock, we can also do that. But don't be doing that in the chat instead of painting, because you got to be catching up. So don't be worried about naming peacocks.
Percy. Oh, that's
Percy
cute.
is good. Oh, Percy the peacock. I like it.
Philip, that's my dad. That's the only reason I can't do that. Okay, so while everyone's catching up, all we have done is dry brushed a few different colors to get the placement for our feathers. So what I've done while everyone's catching up is I put ink spot, which is this beautiful bright blue. Navy is really, really dark. And then ink spot is brighter. So you could use cobalt, you could use true blue, but you just want a more vibrant, brighter blue. So you want to put that on your palette. I am still using only the number 10, but you know what I might do? I'm going to switch to the number 6. And here again, use whatever brush you're most comfortable with. Okay, so how are we doing? Can I go?
I think we should go.
Awesome. Okay, so what I'm going to do, we are going to fill in all of this area that is the background to our bird's feathers. And what I want you guys to do is load a dry brush with the ink spot, not too much paint, because remember, less is more. And I want you to randomly fill in all of these areas. Maybe let's start with making just a really soft line where his feathers will be. They're kind of swerving over to the right. So just for placement, you guys probably can't see that. With the chalk, I'm going to do the really lightest line. Oh, that's too light too. Okay. Just so we kind of stay in that area for his feathers. So the key to this is I don't want you to do a pattern. I don't want you to color in just this area and then this area. I want you to be very random. You know what? I'm going to add a little bit of white to mine. So we are using the ink spot, and pick up a little bit of white on your brush. And I want you to do very loose strokes. And I want you to hop around the canvas everywhere from his little neck to the line that you made to the edge of the canvas, filling that in blue. But I don't want you to outline. I don't want you to fill in just this section first. I want you to hop around doing almost like X's. Someone said once, like a little slip slap, because I don't want you to create a pattern when you're making that background. Does that make sense? You want to jump around and you don't want to outline, but you want to fill in all of those areas to connect his little tail feathers.
So somebody was just saying, so what, just one more time, talk them through what you did with your brush. So it's the little number 6 brush, and you took the ink spot.
Yep. So go in the ink spot, no water, and not too much paint, but enough. And then just a little touch of, let's see if I can do that, a little touch of white, not blended. We're not trying to make a consistent light blue. You just want to have both the white and mostly the blue on your brush. And then you're just going to do very random, loose, almost like X strokes, filling in all of those areas between your feathers. You can outline, like maybe right here is a little section. You can go in there and make sure you get in there, but you don't want to color it exactly. Because what you'll end up doing is you'll create a consistent pattern, and you don't want that in the areas that you're filling in the feathers. You don't want the blue to be consistent. You don't want it to look like subway tile. You just want to be very loose and random, going mostly into the ink spot, and then a little bit into the white now and then. And the reason I've got you guys jumping around the canvas is because if you stay in the same area, that blue shade, the colors will not vary and will not change. It'll always be the same values. Because when you have more or less paint on your brush is when you get all of those different colors by only using the blue and the white. So that's why if you're always moving around, you're keeping that very loose and very random. A few areas I'm using the chisel edge, maybe to get into the small areas where the feathers meet, but definitely don't outline them and don't create a pattern with the blue. Like right in there, I'm using my chisel edge just to get in there, but again, not perfect. I don't want you guys to overthink this blue area. This is just filling in his beautiful tail and all of his feathers. And up here where we drew that little line, I want you to go over that just really loose and random. I don't want that to be a straight line. I want it to just be an area where the feathers and the background come together. And on his little neck, we're going to go back in and make a clean line for his neck. So just make sure you're filling in that area. And don't worry if you cover up that little chalk or pencil pattern that you've created. If you like it a little bit brighter, you would put a little bit more white on your brush, a little bit darker, a little bit less. You can see in some areas, like right there, I stroked a little bit over the green. That is perfect and beautiful. You actually want to do that because you can see you don't want to ever create a really fine out or a really detailed outline. You want all your colors to just kind of overlap where they meet each other. And this is an area where I want you to do to the edge of your canvas. And this is something you can definitely come back and do later. But remember, always do to the edge what we've done to the top. So if you don't add a frame when you're all done, this will be ready to hang because your edges will be beautiful and complete. So all I'm doing is that same ink spot with a little bit of white and just dry brushing the edge of that canvas. You can see you still want that navy blue. Let's see if I hold that up, John. Usually I'm shaking. See where there's always some navy blue still coming through. And that is just giving two colors, white and ink spot, all of that shading and highlighting. It looks like we've used 4 or 5 different blues when really we've only used white and 1 blue on a dark background. Doing the same thing to this edge and really just kind of eyeballing where the guys, let's see, where his little neck stops and where his tail begins, and just dry brushing the white and the ink spot. I'm going to do the same thing on the top. If you guys are catching up or going a little bit slower, don't even worry about your edges until this is over. You guys can go back and do that anytime. I just want to remind people, because sometimes people don't do their edges at all. And it makes such a big difference when your painting is complete. Okay, so you should have really some pretty blue, different colors, different brush stroke directions, filling in your little guy's tail feathers. Okay, here comes the palette knife.
Uh-oh.
On time, John. Good?
Mhm.
Doing okay?
Yes, everyone's doing good. Somebody was just saying, this is definitely a painting for a right-handed person, which is funny. I never thought about that. I mean, if you're lefty, just flip the whole thing around maybe and just have them face the other way.
Yeah, I guess you could. You would just, yeah, you would draw his little head over here and you would do your tail feather.
There you go. Yeah.
You know what? My son is a lefty and he always holds his paper really funny. One thing that I always say when working on a canvas, and we haven't done it yet, but we will when the palette knife is, if you feel more comfortable painting from top to bottom, like if you're a lefty, paint like this, because I know my son writes with his paper like this. So always do not be intimidated to move that canvas around so it's most comfortable for you. Okay, so remember, you don't have to use the palette knife because this is really pretty. We've got lots of shading and highlighting, but for those that like it, I'm just using a very generic plastic palette knife. Palette knives, some are metal, some are wider, some are more pointy. Any palette knife will work, any shape will work. This is more of a fun technique that allows us to add even more dimension that's really loose to any painting. So again, any palette knife, this is just a really inexpensive, basic plastic palette knife. So let me show you guys just how the technique works. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with the yellow. To load a palette knife, all I ever do is pounce it into the paint, and there's no right or wrong. If it loads a little higher or a little less, that is okay. You're just loading the yellow onto the palette knife. And then I always load just the littlest bit of white. And then I pounce it. I want to make sure you guys can see this. And then I just pounce it on the side. You're not blending it completely together. You're just kind of allowing those two paints to merge, but with no right or wrong. I don't want you to overthink what is on your palette knife versus what you see on mine. Mostly yellow and always a little bit of white. The key to the palette knife is you don't want to mash down. You don't want to go in a circle. You want to be very light-handed, and you want to almost, this is a good way to describe it, almost like you're doing a soft brush stroke over the area that is already base coated in that color. So I've got the yellow and the white, very light-handed. I'm just going to let that palette knife skim across the yellow area. Picking up paint as you need it. I'm going to need a little bit more. I want you guys to be able to see it. I'm going to just skim that across the yellow. A little bit more yellow, a little bit more white. Just skimming it almost like you're doing a last polish on that yellow area that you've already dry brushed. And when you're really light-handed and you're flat with your project, all that's doing is adding a little bit of texture and a pop of the same color over the dry brush area. You're not base coating the whole area like we did with the dry brush. Let's see if I can do one holding it. I doubt it. You're just almost giving it a little polish. So see how that's actually a perfect way to see. That's the same yellow, but it looks like 3 or 4 different yellows because of the dry brush, the dark background, and then the palette knife. Does that make a little bit of sense? Barely?
Yep, makes sense.
So then to clean a palette knife, all you've got to do is just put it on that paper towel and never go into the water. And then I'm going to go into that turquoise, that Cayman blue, pouncing into that. My hands are always so dirty. I just saw a comment. Look.
So that's funny.
A little bit of white, no right or wrong. And I am just going to, remember we did a little arch over the yellow. I'm just going to drag that palette knife. Same colors that are below it, dry brushed. Same direction. I'm just going to drag that over the area that's already dry brush base coated. You don't want to cover up your base coat because remember, you're just adding another dimension. Always cleaning it off on a paper towel. I'm going to go into that coral, crushed coral. I need a little more white. So coral and a touch of white. You don't want it to blend into one color. You want them to have, you want those 2 colors, the white and whatever color you're doing, to just be on the palette knife together. I'm just going to polish that over the coral section. And this is something you can absolutely skip if you don't want to and you don't feel comfortable with the palette knife. Do not worry about adding that to the painting. Okay, then I'm going to clean it on the paper towel again and just do it with the red. Just pouncing into the red, pouncing a little bit into the white. Always more of the color and less of the white. And then I'm just going to polish that little area where we had already applied the red dry brush base coat. This is another area where it's so awesome to see. Let's see if you guys can see it. The dry brush looks like a dark burgundy red, and then the palette knife gives a pop of brighter red. And then the green. Cleaned my palette knife on a paper towel, pouncing into the green, the tiniest bit of white, pouncing them together. And then remember, we outlined our color. So you're going to go in that same direction as you did with your brush, but very light-handed with the palette knife, but not mashing into the canvas, just lightly letting it skim over what you've already done. You're just lightly dragging that palette knife over the area that you've already done in the green. I love that green color. It's so pretty. Oh, I forgot that one right there. One thing I do love about the palette knife, so you'll see like maybe right there is a good spot. See where the little bit of green touched the blue? That is actually not a mistake. That's something that you want to happen because doing a really loose painting like this, you don't ever want to create a pattern, and that just gives you a really impressionistic look. Okay, so that was a little bit of the palette knife. Now we're going to go back to the number 10 flat brush, and we are going to clean up this little guy's head with the ink spot. No water. And all I'm going to do is follow my pattern and go in and just soften that edge where his little tails meet his neck. That's a dark color on the camera. Can you guys see that? Just really cleaning up that edge. And then I'm going to go on this side, clean up that edge and just base coat. But again, you don't want to cover up that navy. You want a little bit of that to still show through. And I'm going to pick up the tiniest bit of white, see just on the corner, and very random slip slap strokes, base coat his neck, his head, and his body. Mostly with the ink spot, a little bit of white now and then. Not creating a pattern and not covering up the navy. But just defining his little head. Keeping your brush really dry, because then you get the beautiful, you can see right there, you get that beautiful texture of the canvas, which just adds to your painting. So his little head is base coated. Then I'm going to go in and we are going to just create a really light blue background. And to do that, I'm going to mix Wicker white with just a touch. Look, when I say a touch, just the tiniest corner of the Cayman blue, and load that, mix that together to just be the softest light blue color. If you want it a little bit darker, add a little bit more of that Cayman blue. If you want it a little grayer, add just the tiniest little dot of navy. So mostly white, a little bit of the Cayman blue, and a little bit of navy. And then what I'm going to do around every bit of our canvas that's navy blue, and again, not in stripes or not in a perfect pattern, but very random. You're going to jump around that area, creating that lighter background. Picking up more paint as you need it. When you're doing these light colors, you can definitely see how fun it is to work on the dark base coat, because you can see all of that texture of your canvas. And you can also see how that blue just shades and highlights as you jump around. Let me get a little bit more white. I always have a lot of white on my palette. But you want to fill in that sky so it defines the area behind your little peacock. So white with a little bit of Cayman blue to create that lighter blue. And still the same techniques that we've been using for the entire painting. No water and just letting that background come through. Really loose, large, random strokes. This is an area you would do to the sides, what you do to the top. So you would go in and you would do the side of this canvas in the light blue and the white. So that when you're all done, you can hang it. No need to add a frame. This is the perfect area where you can tell you don't want to outline. The reason why I don't have you use the chisel edge and outline his feathers is because you want a really soft line between the background and his feathers, and even the background and his little head. You don't want to outline it. You want to just repeat these very loose random strokes. Okay, so you'll have really pretty feathers, lots of dimension, lots of layers. You've created a really soft light blue background, and then you've got his cute little head starting to look a little bit more defined. I'm going to dry or wash and dry that brush.
And just, if you want to just go back one more time for someone who was asking the way that you did the head and the neck and everything, you just went with the ink spot and the white again?
Yep. So all I did, because you might have maybe when you were building the tail feathers, maybe you overstroked it a little bit. All you want to do is just really create a nice line for the back of his neck, still with ink spot and a little bit of white. And then the same dry brush technique where you just kind of do large X's, you're going to do ink spot with a little bit of white to fill in his body. You don't want to outline. You don't want to color him in like that. You want to just be very random like that so that you get all of that shading and highlighting without creating a pattern. So that's what you want to do for his little body.
Mm-hmm. Got it.
Got it?
I think they do.
And then this is just a little fun technique. You can see in this, it's a light blue background when you first look at it, but there's a little bit of crushed coral. Just a great way to add more color to your background. So I'm going to get a little bit of that crushed coral, mix that with mostly white. And if you don't want to do this step, absolutely no need to. I just love when a color that is unexpected sneaks into a base coat. So I'm just putting a few dry brush strokes of that crushed coral mixed with white into my light blue background. This style painting is just fun to have that little pop of color. So then what we're going to do is we're going to get back out that palette knife only if you want to. I know, only if you want to, because it's beautiful if you don't. If you don't, you've got such a beautiful background. So there's no need to get it out if it's something you're not comfortable with. Little bit of that Cayman blue and the white. And I'm going to make that background color again. Cayman blue and white. And there's no rhyme or reason. It doesn't have to be the same shade. It doesn't have to be exactly the same. You just want to mix a little bit more so that you can load that on your palette knife. This is a fun place to show the palette knife. Palette knife is also a great tool to make a solid background, a textured background on any painting. So all I'm going to do is start at the top. You see I've loaded that light blue with a little bit of white, and I'm just going to softly let that skim across my background, stopping at the top of the bird's head. But you can see it's just, make sure you guys can see that. See how it just adds a layer of paint? It looks like we're working with oils. I'm going to just start on the edge of that canvas. It's more comfortable for me to pull towards me. Oh, I got a little bit of blue on there. That's okay. I'm going to go right over that. Scoop that up with the edge of my palette knife. Get that off of there. And then I'm going to go over it again with just the light blue and the white. Just another layer of color. That's really the secret to the palette knife. It's just, if you're comfortable with it, it's allowing you to add another layer to this style of painting. But it's not something that you have to do. It's such a fun tool though, and there's so much that you can do with it. I love it that people are trying it. Okay, so you should have a beautiful background. Your little guy's head and neck should be colored in blue. And now what we're going to do is we're going to give him a little bit of detail. But you can see his little eye, his little beak, the details on his neck. You don't want that to be perfect, like a perfect circle eye, because you want it to match the style of painting we've done for the feathers. So what I'm going to do, using that number, let's see, that number 6 flat brush, clean and dry. I'm going to load just a little bit of white only onto that brush. And all I'm going to do, dry brush still with no water, I'm going to maybe accent his little head a little bit, maybe a little bit under his neck. Less is more, not too much. I'm going to pick up a little bit of that ink spot. Just adding another layer of dry brush like we did with the feathers. And then where his eyes are, what I want to do is just represent that area. I don't want to apply a pattern and I don't want to overthink it, because the thing with animals that is so hard is the details, the eyes, the nose, the mouth. And with a style like this, I just want to represent his eye area. So almost like a zebra stripe, an irregular line, I'm going to just dry brush a few little strokes in that area where his eye would be. Maybe a little highlight on the back of his neck. Using that same brush, but drying it off on a paper towel, I'm going to pick up a little bit of that navy. The navy is what we did our base coat with in the very beginning. And right over that white, again, very loose and random, I'm just going to dry brush to kind of represent the area where his eye would be. Not a circle, just an area. And then what I'm going to do with the end of my palette knife is I am going to pick up the navy, just the very end of that, and I am going to put that where his eye would be. The reason I like to use the palette knife is because it's irregular and it won't allow you to overthink it and make that a perfect circle. Then I'm going to clean that palette knife on the paper towel and pick up the tiniest bit of white and just kind of pounce that right on top. It's hard to see on there, but what it does is it doesn't allow you to paint a perfect circle and make his eye a different style of painting than all of the feathers and all of the backgrounds that we've already done. So then using this palette knife, I'm going to dip that in the ink spot, in the navy, whichever color you like best. And what I'm doing, I'm not loading the flat bottom that we did before. I'm loading that thin edge. I'm just pouncing that into the ink spot. And then what I'm going to do is using the flat edge, I'm just going to pull that through the centers of our little colored feathers.
Oh, cool.
To create kind of a vein and almost give like a base to the feathers, how they hook to his little body. Oh, very random, not exact. You're just loading that flat edge of your palette knife, not the bottom, but just that flat side. You could also use a butter knife. You could use the end of maybe a gift card, but you just want to pull that through. You could maybe add a few different veins just to give some dimension to his little tail. But just to add one more layer. The reason I like to do it with this and not with a brush is because a brush, you're going to want to control it too much. The palette knife allows you to just have more fun with it. And then loading that palette knife the same, just pouncing on the end. I'm going to start on top of his little crown and just pull down a few little, almost like stripes, but very random, to create that little crown on top of his head. Now turn the canvas if you need to, so it's very comfortable. Like I have to turn it a little bit when I go this way. Almost like a little C. You don't want them to be straight up and down, but you just want to pull those onto the top of the crown of his head. And then I'm just going to pick up that same brush, and maybe where I overlapped his body or his head, I'm just going to dry brush through those to get rid of those stripes on the top of his head. And then using my dry brush, I'm going to load that ink spot with just a touch of white, just like what we've been doing, but I'm actually going to pounce. I'm going to try to hold my hand funny. I'm just going to lightly tap on top of those lines that we created to create those little feathers that are on the top of his little head.
That is his crest, Kirsten.
Right.
Yes, indeed.
Your knowledge of birds is just.
I've been Googling the peacock, since we're, talking.
I love it. You've learned
You
so
know
much.
that they shed their feathers at the end of every mating season? They start from scratch on those big feathers every year.
Oh my gosh.
True story.
They all come out.
That's what it says here.
Well, I'm
Also,
glad
the
to hear
peacock
that.
is the national bird of India. So if anyone finds themselves in a trivia contest and wants to know that, you will be like, yeah, it's the
You have
peacock.
done so much research, John. I'm so impressed.
Well, I've got the Googler right here on my phone, and I am happy to provide this knowledge to everyone.
I
So,
love it. Okay, so then you can see our little guy doesn't have a beak. So what we are going to do is, again, you can definitely use your brush. But the reason why I like to use the palette knife is it doesn't allow you to make a perfect little beak, because you want it to be soft and very loose like the rest of your painting. So I'm going to load the side of my palette knife again in that dark yellow, not the flat section, but just the side. And I'm going to turn my paint. Actually, I'm not. I'm going to just drag that up against his little body to make a little triangle at first. And then using that palette knife, just the flat edge, I'm going to fill in his little beak by just going back and forth, picking up the yellow as I need it, and filling in that, not a perfect triangle, very irregular edges. And then I'm going to get a little bit of white and do that same, pulling it towards his little body. But then you've got yellow and white, not filled in completely, still able to see the background, but creating the details of his little beak. And just for some little finishing touches, I am going to load that palette knife. Here we go again, into a little bit of the ink spot, a little bit of the white, not loaded perfect, no rhyme or reason. And I'm just going to skim that across his body, just so his body matches all of the details that we've created in the background and on the tail feathers. So just using that palette knife flat to the surface, not mashing down, but just dragging that so that it creates just another layer of color. What a lot of people like to do at the end, maybe a spot where the sun or a highlight would be, is just load white onto your palette knife, pounce some of that off, and maybe in a few little areas, you can just drag some white just to create a few little pops of color. Some areas where maybe the sun would hit this little peacock while he's out in the field, just white, no colors. But if you tried to add dimension like that with a brush, it would be so hard. But by doing it, by just loading in the palette knife and just dragging that really softly over your painting in just a few little areas, you get great dimension. If it's more or less of a color that you want, you can go right over that with the palette knife. I'm going to add a little bit of blue back onto this area on his little neck. But you're just layering color after color, never adding water and never having too much paint, because you can see all the great areas on there that navy blue background still shows through. And that just gives you all of that dimension. So that's our little peacock. Are there any questions?
I mean, I don't think so. But
peacock knowledge?
Yes, a lot of knowledge, not only about peacocks, but about how to paint, which is really why they actually came here. So everybody was saying that these are great techniques and they definitely appreciate it.
Well, I'm glad.
So I've put it in the chat a few times, but just for those who don't have the chat window open or aren't sure, these classes are available at michaels.com/classes. So the same place that you go to sort of sign up for classes, I think you can go back and find past ones as well.
Definitely. Now I want to show you guys the class for next week. So next week.
Oh, yes.
Oh, next week's a much easier class. So next week is just a really nice summer landscape. Lavender fields and just very, very nice and easy. This is for next week, for next Monday.
Who's painting next week? Is that Jesse or
Nope,
you?
I'm painting next week also. Yeah.
Okay, it looked like one of yours, so I wasn't sure. Okay.
Yeah, so this will be what we're doing next week. Just a really easy landscape.
Okay. Well, guys, before we let you go, again, one of the things that we ask for people to do when you actually complete your painting is to make sure that you tag us on social so that we can see it. So tag @Plaid Crafts, hashtag, you can hashtag, Plaid Crafts, and also make it with Michael's and Michael's classes. They like it when you do that so that they can see your stuff and we can see your stuff. And we invite you to join us on Plaid Crafts Facebook page. Come on over to our page. We are live all the time, multiple times a week. Andy goes live, Kirsten goes live, Jesse goes live, Kira, all the people that you see here on Monday nights are generally live during the week teaching you one thing or another. So please join us.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, and I think that's about it.
Thank you guys for joining us. I hope you guys learned some great techniques. Practice, practice, practice. Once you get it down, it's so much fun to do on so many different paintings.
Okay, guys. Well, we will see you next week.
Yep. Bye, everyone. Thanks for joining us.
Bye.
Bye.